Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Hope everyone's having a, a good evening and enjoying the summer so far. And it's busy with a lot going on here in the peak summer months. So thank you for joining us. We've got a fascinating topic today, which is, of course, black bears, which isn't an animal you see all the time, but I know whenever I see one or friend or family member sees one, it's always the highlight of their day. And I'm sure for our guest speaker today, even though he gets to work with and see black bears more often than most of us, I'm sure it's also the highlight of his day still. So we've got Dave Wattles with us here today, who's the black bear and fur-bearer project leader with MassWildlife. He's been working with large mammals in Massachusetts for 20 years and has been a black bear biologist with the state for 10 years. So I'm very excited to hear what he has to share with us. And before I pass it over, I'll just mention briefly a little bit of the structure. So there will be a Q&A section at the end of the session. So if at any point you have questions during the presentation, you should be able to type them in by clicking the Q&A symbol at the bottom of your screen. So if anything comes up during the presentation or at the end, feel free to put it in there, and we'll get to that at the end. And the presentation will be recorded as well, and we'll be able to share that at the end as well. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Dave here, and I'll be back at the end.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen real fast. Get the presentation up here. So, as Henry said, my name's Dave Wattles. I am the black bear and furbearer biologist with the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. This presentation is going to be a little bit on basic bear ecology, just to set the tone. We're going to talk about the status of the bear population, what's happening with it, the research that we do on bears in the state, and then conflict prevention for the conservation of a lot of the species that I deal with. Certainly bears, coyotes, beaver. Conflict prevention plays an enormous role in their conservation in as heavily developed a landscape as we have here in Massachusetts, because they all do have the potential to cause quite a lot of conflict. And it's actually where you, as conservation-minded individuals, can play a huge role, both in and around your own home and neighborhood, and also spreading the word here that I'm going to talk to you about conflict prevention towards the end of this talk. So we are talking about the American black bear. It is the only bear found in the eastern United States. It's smaller than grizzly bears, polar bears, but still a very substantial animal. Males or boars can be quite large. We have lots and lots of males running around Massachusetts that are over 450 pounds, 600 pound males. They're solitary with the exception of the mating season, when they hugely expand their range to try to interact with as many females, as they possibly can. Females are much smaller, anywhere from 140 to 300 pounds. A 300-pound female is a very large female, and that would be in a heavily suburban area where their diet is heavily supplemented by human-associated foods. 140, 160-pound female could be a mature female in an area that is almost entirely forested, where she's feeding on just natural foods, and that really ends up being just about the max body weight we see in those locations. Females give birth to cubs every other year. So right now, we're just at the tail end of the mating season for black bears. The mating season is kind of from May through July. Just saw a video someone posted about with bears mating in a backyard in Belchertown just a couple days ago. So it's still continuing. But what happens with black bears is they do something called delayed implantation, where the egg is fertilized, the eggs are fertilized, they begin to develop, but they don't implant in the uterine wall. They kind of remain floating there. And the pregnancy pauses at that point. It's not until they enter the den, when their physiology changes, that something happens that triggers them for the embryos to implant in the uterine wall and for the pregnancy to develop. At that point, the cubs are then born blind, very small, relatively hairless, in the den in mid-January. From mid-January until they emerge at the beginning of April. The females are nursing them and they're getting stronger, bigger, just based on her milk. At that time, she's not eating, drinking, doing anything. She's just drawing off her fat reserves to do that. Once they emerge, she shows them essentially how to be bears for the rest of the year, how to find food, how to avoid dangers, how to navigate the landscape in Massachusetts. They'll den with her next winter as 1-year-old cubs and then disperse after they leave the den sometime around April and May prior to the next mating season. And then she'll give birth again the following winter. So every other year they're giving birth to cubs. Black bears are what we call opportunistic omnivores. Omnivores meaning they eat both plant and animal matter. And opportunistic meaning that bears will eat just about anything. And really anything is a food source for them. In the spring, there's not a lot of natural food available to bears. They tend to use the first emergent green vegetation that comes up. It's much more protein rich, much more digestible than vegetation is at this time of year. Skunk cabbage is an extremely important spring food for them. They find it in wetlands, the tuberous roots, the leaves. It's a really important early spring food. They'll also eat acorns, hickory nuts that have fallen the previous fall and overwintered. They'll scavenge on carrion or dead animals. And spring is kind of the only time of year where bears can actually prey on animals. And it's with white-tailed deer fawns. When shortly after they're born, they're highly immobile, and opportunistically, bears will feed on them if they can find them in the spring. Because of the relative lack of food, we also see a very, very heavy use of human-associated foods in the spring and lots of use of suburban areas and neighborhoods. A lot of the habitat use in the spring is concentrated around wetlands. As the seasons progress and different foods become available, black bears will transition their diet to take advantage of those. Colonial insects are a big one. So ants, bees, wasps, they'll dig up the nests from the ground, rotten logs, stumps, and feed on the larvae, the insects themselves, honey. Berries, pretty much every kind of berry and fruit imaginable they'll feed on, right from strawberries to blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, grapes, cherries. Really important natural food for black bears. This is referred to as soft mass, and it is really kind of their critical summer food. Unfortunately, bears will also readily feed on crops, the biggest two being corn and apples, and bears can do an extremely large amount of damage in a cornfield in a short period of time. They essentially just go out into the cornfield and will flatten acreage of corn in a short period of time. It's not until the fall when bears really start to gain the weight they need to survive hibernation. They enter what's called hyperphagia at this time. This is a compulsion to eat as much food as possible. You've probably seen this from like the Fat Bear Week where bears are gorging themselves on salmon in Alaska. We don't have that kind of food source here, but they're feeding on, unfortunately, corn and apples like that, but the natural foods that they feed on readily are acorns, beech nuts, and hickory nuts, with acorns and beech nuts being the two most critical fall foods for black bears in the Northeast. They'll also scavenge on deer carcasses in the fall as well. This is the rough distribution of bears in Massachusetts. Our bear population is growing and expanding. And this is the continued slow recovery of our black bear population from historic lows. It's not too long ago that our bear population was only in the northern Berkshires, and the population has slowly expanded from that location to be where we have bears today. The blue-gray area is where we have resident females actively producing cubs and raising cubs. And the orange or brown area is where we're starting to get more and more consistent reports of bears in general, but also females starting to pop up in those areas as well as the bear population continues to spread towards the east. Every year, we're also getting reports of typically male bears, and really only male bears, wandering through different portions of eastern Massachusetts. Southeast Mass, there was the bear we moved from right next to the Cape Cod Bridge just a couple weeks ago. A male bear that had dispersed out of our established range, trying to find a territory of its own. One of the best ways to look at the growth of our population over time, and you can see the very rapid growth of the population here, is simply looking at where we've taken bears in our hunting season. We do have a hunting season for black bears. It's what we use as wildlife managers to manage the growth and the size of the bear population and to maintain a bear population at levels where they're not causing so much conflict with people, where suddenly the public starts to look at them as a pest rather than something to be enjoyed and to value, like Henry was talking about at the beginning. But if you look just back in 1980, just a small remnant population in the northern Berkshires. By 10 years later, bears had expanded throughout the northern Berkshires, spread into eastern Mass, crossed the Mass Pike. Keep in mind, these are only where bears had been taken in the hunting season, not where they existed at the time. By 2000, all throughout western Mass, bears are now establishing themselves in Connecticut. And then moving further forward, you can see by 2010, we're starting to see what we saw 30 years prior happening in Central Mass is what happened already in the Berkshires. So what's now playing out in Eastern Mass is something that we've seen before as well. Another way we can look at just where we have bears in the state is calls either to our agency or the environmental police. Environmental police being a law enforcement agency, all their calls to their dispatch are recorded. So this provides a good spatial representation of where the calls come in from. And you can see that the vast majority are from our established range, that area where we've got active reproduction. But remember, those bears in all these reports are coming from thousands of resident bears. Tens, dozens, 20 bears in individual towns or more, just creating this number of calls. Whereas in 10 to 15 years, or 7 years, 10 to 15 bears wandering through Eastern Mass generates an enormous amount of phone calls. Every time a bear wanders into Eastern Mass, my phone rings off the hook as different police departments, the media, etc., is trying to figure out where we have bears moving through a population of people that is naive to how to live with bears. So we can use these things to gain an idea of what's happening generally with the bear population. But in order to make any management decisions or really understand what's happening, we use the research we conduct on black bears. And for the past 45 years, back to 1980, MassWildlife, along with researchers at UMass, have been continuously conducting research on black bears in the state. And we do that primarily by tagging and collaring bears so that we can monitor their survival, reproduction, and the health of their population. We capture new bears by trapping them in the spring. So each spring, our regional biologists are setting out these traps. They're 2.5 55-gallon drums welded together. There's a bait bag in the far end, and the bear crawls in, pulls the bait bag, and the door closes behind it. And yes, even this large male on the left will squeeze himself into that trap. We don't put very many collars on males because they're so large. You can actually see it there, how big his neck is relative to his head. It's very difficult to keep them collared. So right now, the only bears that we have collared, and that's most of the time what it is, are females. Once the bear's in the trap, we can immobilize it or tranquilize it using a jab stick, as you see in the top figure. It is essentially a modified syringe on a pole, and we can administer the tranquilizer through the holes in the trap. Once the bear's been tranquilized, we can open the door, reach in, and pull it out. We can also opportunistically collar bears when they wander into a city or town. A female with cubs ends up in a tree in some developed location. We can sometimes come out and dart the bear and opportunistically get a collar on a bear in a place we wouldn't otherwise. And you can see that police officer was very happy to participate that day that we did this one. However it is we get our hands on the bear, once it's immobilized, we're going to now simply determine what the sex of the bear is, assess its condition, estimate its age, look for injuries, just give it an overall health checkup. All the bears are given ear tags. They have a unique number on them. So should 3 years from now that bear have dispersed into New Hampshire and be taken in their hunting season, be taken in our hunting season, be involved in a vehicle collision, what have you, we know when we first captured it and estimated its age, how long it survived after that, and what was its ultimate fate. Almost all of the females we capture, if they're large enough, are given a radio tracking collar. These collars enable us to follow them into the future, and should they die for any reason, the signal from that collar changes, and it lets us know, okay, we need to go in and walk in on that animal and see if we can determine what the cause of mortality was. We just had one of those today, where fortunately it was a young bear that we collared that had a leather split designed just to do this. The split failed and the collar fell off, so the bear's still alive, but we recovered the collar today. Half of the collars we have, or almost all of the brand new collars that go out on bears when we first trap them, are GPS collars. They also record a GPS location every 45 minutes. So we get really detailed information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of what these bears are doing, what habitat types they're using, forests, wetlands of different types, how they're moving around the landscape and interacting with the road network, how often they're using developed places and interacting with the modern landscape of Massachusetts. So really painting a complete picture of what's happening with bears. We also use the collars to track the females to their dens every winter. So here's a variety of different den types you can see. I think a lot of people have an idea that a bear den is what you see in the middle there, a rock cave. In reality, that's relatively few and far between. There's only a handful of places in the state where we encounter dens like that. The vast majority are under fallen logs, in a burrow in the ground, in some dense brush, in a hollow in a tree, either at the base of a tree or up in a tree, something like that. They can just be in some brush, as I said, in a log pile, under a shed or a deck or a porch, in a burrow in the ground, or sometimes they just make a nest on the ground, whether it's raking up pine needles at the base of a pine tree and just building a big bird's nest, or as you see there in some Phragmites, essentially just building a bird's nest and being exposed to the elements all winter long. We'll sneak in on the dens as quietly as we can because the bears are just basically napping. They're not true hibernators, in where it takes a long time for them to ramp back up from hibernation. They can wake up just like that. So if we're making a lot of noise as we approach the den, we're talking, breaking sticks, you name it, she's going to wake up, she's going to be alert, and she's going to leave. So we try to sneak in as quietly as possible. Again, administer the tranquilizer with a jab pole. You can see in the top middle figure there, it can be up to 12 feet long now. We also have dart guns as backup in case she were to run. Again, once she's immobilized, we pull her out. We give her a health checkup, look for injuries, weigh her. And we're also now refitting her collar, replacing ear tags, replacing collars as needed. We try to handle them every year to make sure the collars are fitting appropriately, and there aren't any issues there. As I mentioned, also roughly half of the females in our population are giving birth every winter, and so now we can learn about their cub production. We wait to do this work with the females that are going to have newborn cubs until the last couple weeks of February, the beginning of March, when the cubs are a little bit older. But now we can determine how many cubs she gave birth to. We weigh the cubs, determine the sex of the cubs, so we get information on their reproduction success. So all of a sudden we're having information on survival, how long they're living, causes of mortality, now cub production. Once we're done working mama, done handling the cubs, we'll tuck her back in the den. We'll tuck the cubs right in next to her. We'll cover the den up with branches and brush so that they're secure until she recovers. Once she does, they'll spend the rest of the winter in the den, and as I said, emerge around April 1st. We can repeat this process now the next winter, and if we can successfully immobilize the mother, we then one at a time now immobilize these now 1-year-old cubs that are anywhere from 30 pounds for a forest bear and a bad food year to 120 pounds for a 1-year-old bear in a suburban area. These bears are also, if we're unsuccessful in capturing, we're just doing a quick 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 bears ran away. We know that it was her and 3 cubs. Again, getting information on how many bears survived to 1 year of age. So again, if the female gave birth to 3 newborn cubs and she has 2 yearlings with her the following year, we know 2 of those 3 cubs survived. So again, getting information on survival for that first year. All of the cubs are given ear tags, just like the ones that we trap. And some of the females are given expandable collars. These collars accommodate their growth throughout the year. And when they den by themselves as a 2-year-old for the first time the next winter, we can then immobilize her again and give her a full-size collar. It was one of those 1-year-old females in the expandable part of her collar that failed today. So we lost the bear, but it did what it was supposed to do with the belting failing. And by doing this over time, we've learned a lot about our bear population. We know that we have very high adult female survival rates. And we know that this is also the factor of the population that really has the most impact on whether or not we have an increasing, as we do, a stable or a declining bear population. We have high female survival. It's been very consistent over the years throughout this period of population growth that you saw before. We know that almost invariably now they're giving birth to their first cubs at 3 years old. It is now a real surprise if we go in on a 3-year-old and she doesn't have cubs. It used to be, this slide said 3 to 4, but that shifted earlier to now where it's almost all 3 years old. We know differences in litter size for a first litter versus subsequent litters. Usually it's 1 to 2 small cubs versus 2, 3, 4 relatively robust cubs for a mature female. We also know differences in cub survival for that first litter versus the subsequent litters. Those females with the that have already successfully raised cubs, pretty much every year they're going to have cubs, or every other year, and they're going to successfully raise those cubs for the year. Those first-time moms just haven't figured it out yet. The survival isn't as good. I know what I was going to say in the previous slide. 2.7 cubs is roughly our average litter size. But those females, those young females, they're in poorer body condition. They're not as large, don't have the fat reserves that a mature female does, so they might lose their milk sooner. They might not nurse the cubs as much in the den as a mature female is, because they just don't know what they're supposed to do with these things that are suddenly there in their den. They move around much, much more. We see from the GPS data that they're moving all over the place, whereas mature females will park in a wetland, not making her cubs move around much. So those first-time moms are dragging their cubs across roads, across wetlands, potentially interacting with males, risky situations, and just overall their survival isn't as good. And we've also learned about causes of mortality. We know that there is very little natural mortality in our bear population. It's almost all vehicle collisions, nuisance kills by the public, and that predominantly being associated with backyard livestock like chickens now, that we'll talk more about later, and then from our hunting season. And obviously, if we want to regulate the size of the population or the growth rate of the population, the amount of hunting pressure, whether up or down, is the thing that we can manipulate. But we have bears in the state. We've got a collared female that we first collared in 2011 that's still with us today. So she's almost 20 years old. We've had females in the mid-20s before that we've had collared. So there are bears that can live to well into their mid-teens and into their 20s. This figure shows some of the data from some of the GPS collars. Each one of the different colors here is from a different collared female. So this starts to show you in our established bear range how many bears there are living around there. Again, each one of these is a different collared female. So you can see that's 7 different females right there in a relatively small area. This bear in pink is actually denned multiple times. Unfortunately, she just died about a month ago. She was hit and killed in a vehicle collision on Route 116 there in Hadley that she'd crossed hundreds of times before. But she's had denned on the UMass campus and given birth to newborn cubs there with 20, 30,000 students running around, and we just left her right on campus. But this is just some of the bears that are living in these areas. All these yellow circles, these are females that we have collared with conventional radio collars, that they're not getting GPS data anymore. So that's 5 more females there in the landscape. A couple years ago, we trapped 3 more females in that area. That's a 1-year-old female of that yellow circled female there. We needed to trap her to replace her collar. We trapped 3 new mature females there. And another female over here. And just last year, we trapped and tagged 25 new bears in this area. That's 15 males and 10 females. So you can see just in this area how many females that is, each producing a litter of 2.7 cubs every other year, successfully raising them. And you can see how the population now is growing very, very rapidly. And how many bears are living amongst us on a daily basis, I think would shock most people with the densities of bears that are around our homes. Another aspect of the research is collaborating with MassDOT, looking at the bear movements. We had a postdoc a number of years ago now who did some really interesting analyses. These are a couple more of those GPS collar data sets showing bears using different types of developed landscape. On the left, that's a large block of forest, but then agricultural land with just some wetlands and forest strips in between. In the one on the right, that is a more suburban landscape. And you can see that the bear habitat use and movement is very clustered in these places. So the postdoc did some analyses where she was looking at the different natural features of the landscape, so different types of forests, wetlands, how they affected bears' movements on the landscape, as well as looking at how agriculture, different densities of residential habitat, residential development, commercial development, wetlands, open water bodies, roads affected bears' ability to move across the landscape. She came up with a model that different portions of the landscape had different resistance to movement. And then she simulated bear movement across the landscape. What she did was create a couple thousand starting points and ending points in Massachusetts, where it said from each one of those several thousand points, I want you to move through that landscape that the bear model informed and say, move through only the portions of the landscape that facilitated bear movement and avoid those that restricted bear movements. And move from that location to every single one of the other starting points. And you do this time and time and time and time again. And as these bears move through the landscape like this, dark green lines are where those thousands and thousands and thousands of simulations coalesced to the same spots. Indicative that these are places that are important for landscape connectivity for bears. This data is now directly being incorporated into, and this model is being directly incorporated into MassDOT's project evaluation program and the State Wildlife Transportation Action Plan, which is a major plan by MassDOT to try to mitigate the effects of the road network on wildlife. So this bear movement model is being incorporated into that. Deer collision data, endangered species data, stream and wetland crossing data are all being fed in there. So if MassDOT is planning a road construction project or a bridge replacement or something, can they incorporate wildlife crossing in there to try to make the road network as permeable as possible to bears? We're going to transition now to the coexisting part of the talk, but again, to give you an idea of what it means to have bears living in and amongst us on a daily basis. Maybe you're familiar with this portion of the state. Again, Amherst with UMass Amherst here, the city of Northampton, greater Springfield suburbs down here. Again, GPS collared bears with each one of the different colors of clusters, a different collared female. This data is actually from 2017, 2018, so many years ago. There's many more bears there, and this is only females. It's only the bears we had captured. And you can see the city of Northampton disappears amongst the bears. Bears are in yards, in neighborhoods, next to schools, next to playgrounds on a daily basis with relatively limited serious conflict from them. And bears are using some of the most densely developed places in the state as well. You know, this is the greater Springfield area, Westover Air Force Base, Chicopee, Holyoke, Ludlow. Bears, these are all females raising cubs in these places, living directly amongst us. And this is the challenge that I have as a wildlife manager, is that this type of habitat configuration is found throughout the state. You know, your conservation properties may help to support this, where there's forested and wetland habitat interspersed with all of the communities from the New York border all the way into the inner Boston suburbs, where our homes, neighborhoods, and houses are interspersed by wildlife habitat. And it's my job to get the people to understand that when they're living in their neighborhood and living in their backyard, that the decisions that you make as individuals and communities about food determines how much it's as well, and how much conflict there is as a result of that. And that's what we're going to talk about now. My goal as the bear manager for the state is to have a healthy bear population feeding on natural foods and living compatibly with the human population. But I can't do that with your help. I can't do that without the help of the general public. Going back to some basic bear biology, why do bears hibernate in winter? It's not because it's cold. It's not because there's deep snow. Bear is easily as well adapted to the cold and snow, and more so than a deer. It has a thicker coat than a deer or a rabbit or a ton of different animals that are active all winter. But unlike deer and rabbits and moose, they can't digest woody vegetation. They're also not capable of chasing down prey like a coyote or a bobcat or a fisher can. So essentially, there's no food available for a bear in the winter. 99% of their diet is plant-based, and there's just nothing for them to eat. So instead, they go into the den, they decrease their metabolic rates, and they survive that period of time by drawing off their reserves of fat that they stored throughout the rest of the year. But what this means is that from March or April, when they emerge from the den, until November, December, January, when they enter the den, they are driven to find as much food as they possibly can and eat as much as they possibly can. That is inherently what a bear is. But what this means is they'll take advantage of those free meals that we have around our backyards and our communities all year round. And this is the root cause of human-bear conflict. It's not a bad bear. It's not a nuisance bear. It's not a problem bear. It's simply a bear taking advantage of those free meals that we unfortunately have in every single community in Massachusetts. And the biggest culprit, some of you may have in your own backyard, the biggest culprit is bird feeders. They are the bane of my existence, and they are the single biggest driver of human-wildlife conflict in the state, bar none. And there's absolutely no such thing, actually, as a bird feeder. They're wildlife feeders. And you know this. You know the squirrels, the chipmunks, the rats, the mice are attracted to the seed as well. The predators are attracted to all those animals that are attracted to the seed. And for bears, this is absolutely irresistible. This bear can go out, they can dig up a log and eat some ants. They can pick some berries somewhere, or they can come to someone's backyard and eat several thousand calories of birdseed. That's like downing an entire jar or more of peanut butter. And they can go 4 houses down and they can do the same. And guess what? They magically refill the next day. And so these bird feeders are essentially training bears that the best place to find food is in our yards, in our neighborhoods, and up on our decks. Bird feeders are undoubtedly the number one source of attractant for bears, and they are the driver of human-wildlife conflict, and they harm bears. We hear all the time that I don't mind having the bear on my property. Oh, I like seeing the bear, blah, blah, blah. The person 2 houses down is terrified of the bears. The person 4 houses down has backyard chickens. And as that bear is going yard to yard to yard to find bird feeders, it's now finding chickens. It's breaking into that chicken coop, and that person has a shotgun. And that bear ends up getting shot. And it all stems back to the bird feeders attracting bears to backyards. So it does do harm to these animals. They suffer when they learn to do these things. I'm going to highlight this bear because we're going to talk about her some more in a minute. She is one of those 1-year-old females that we collared with her mom in the den. You can just barely see the edge of the collar housing underneath her chin here. Her mom used the Holyoke Range and a little bit down into the suburbs to the south of it in Granby and South Hadley. As soon as this bear dispersed, she was in the suburbs. We got calls immediately about her on decks, really pushing the boundaries. Why? Because mom had shown her that the best place to find food was right there on someone's deck. And we'll talk more about her in a minute. In case it's not clear, no bird feeders. There's no good time of day. People tell us all the time, oh, I take them in at night. What do you see here? Pictures in the middle of the day. What do you see on every town Facebook page? Pictures of bears out in the middle of the day. The collars tell us that bears are more active during the day than they are at night. So that doesn't do anything to solve these problems. Excuse me. Garbage is another big attractant for bears, whether it's your household garbage or it's from dumpsters. We recommend garbage is stored in a secure shed, a garage where the bears can't access it, not put out till the morning of pickup. If folks don't have, or you know someone who's having an issue with bears in their garbage and they don't have a shed or a garage, the state of Florida put together super, super, super detailed plans of how to build these little garbage can storage sheds. They fit a full, roll off type of garbage can inside. They have all the materials, step by step instructions, pictures. You cannot not do this. Trust me, it doesn't matter how handy you are. Those are available for download on our bear page, mass.gov/bears. That'll show up many times later here. But these are available for download if you know anyone who needs them. And apartment complexes, campgrounds, retirement facilities, restaurants, bears get into dumpsters. They can cave in the plastic tops of dumpsters. Oftentimes the doors are left open, they're overflowing. That's a huge attractant for a bear. Time and time and time again, if people call us about a bear in a dumpster, if they get a metal top dumpster, and most waste disposal companies will now provide one, the problems disappear. Yep, the doors have to be closed and latched, but a bear can't cave them in, and it will cause those problems to disappear. So again, if you know someone who's having problems with a dumpster, recommend a metal top dumpster. Waste disposal companies will provide them. And finally, the big one. This is the one that's really causing problem for bears in the state. Bears are being shot every year. Cubs are being orphaned every year because of this issue right now. This figure grossly, grossly, grossly underestimates the number of backyard chickens and beehives there are out there. And now increasingly backyard sheep and goats as well. And this figure grossly, grossly, grossly underestimates the number of bears out there. And as I said before, as these bears have come to backyards to feed at bird feeders and other food sources, they've learned, ooh, chicken in a box. I can eat that. I like that. And you cannot build a chicken coop that can keep a bear out. It doesn't matter. People tell me that they built the Fort Knox of chicken coops. I reinforced it with 2x4s and did this, and the bear just ripped right into it. Guess who this is, ladies and gentlemen? This is this little bear. As she grew up, she developed a really good taste for chicken. We got call after call after call on her breaking the chicken coops because she had a collar. We received calls on her. Eventually, we found her collar cut off and thrown in a river. Presumably, someone got sick of this, shot her, took it into their own hands, and threw the collar in the river. So again, this is where these behaviors develop. It all stemmed from her learning from mom that the best place to find food was at bird feeders and backyards, and it ended badly for the bear. If you know anyone, if you have them, or if you know anyone who does, electric fencing is the only thing that is going to prevent bears from breaking into chicken coops, destroying beehives, attacking sheep and goats. If you live in our bear range or close to our bear range and you don't have electric fencing, it is not if, it is when it will happen, and you will lose your entire flock. You will lose all of your hives. So yes, it's an expense, but it pays for itself in one visit by a bear if you don't have it. I put together an electric fencing guide a number of years ago. It's again available on our website, as you can see there, mass.gov/bears. It has step-by-step instructions. Again, the materials, the way we recommend that you set up the fences, baiting the wires so you draw the bear right to the wire so it gets a shock, learns the lesson. It's better for that bear to get a shock of electricity than to be shot with a shotgun because it got into chicken coops. Lots of information available on our website about camping in backcountry for landlords, bears in backyards, protecting livestock, all available on the website there. Share those resources with friends and community. Again, this is where you can be a voice in your community to spread this word. If you're active on social media pages or just with any group in your community, you hear about these things, please, please spread the word. It's being a good steward for our wildlife. Presumably you're here because you care about wildlife and in nature. Please be a good steward. Food sources are the reason the bears are in the backyard. It's the bird feeder. It's the garbage. You remove those, there's no need for that bear to be there. The females, unfortunately, are teaching those cubs that the best place to find food is close to our homes. And the more time they spend there, the greater the chances are that they're going to learn to break into chicken coops. They're going to break into sheds and garages to access a bucket of bird seed or garbage. So it's better for our bears in the long run if they don't get these food sources at all. Bears aren't going to change. As I said at the beginning, these bears are driven to find food. That's inherently what a bear is. So really, we as individuals, we as communities have to change if we're going to coexist with them. Again, we want a healthy bear population that we all can enjoy, but we want them living in the forests and not our backyards. So again, mass.gov/bears, lots of information there, or you can call us, call the environmental police anytime if you need assistance. But with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dave. That was great. I learned a lot, and we'll definitely pass along those resources you mentioned as well. It looks like there's some great stuff that you may not be able to find other places. So we do have some questions here, and if anyone else can think of something that they want to pose as a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A section. So let's see. I'll go in order here. We've got some from earlier in your presentation. Are there any other animals that you're familiar with that experience pregnancy pause?
I believe Fisher do as well. I think some of the mustelids will. I believe I know for sure that Fisher do. I don't off the top of my head know any others.
Cool, thanks. I've got another one here. Do areas with dense bear populations have lower deer populations due to spring fawn predation?
No, and this is kind of whether it's. I mean, if you think about our deer population in the state, it has rapidly grown over the past 30 to 40 years. So has our bobcat population, our bear population, and coyotes have become established in the state and now spread everywhere. So though all three of those predators are preying on deer fawns in the spring, and yet our population of deer continues to increase rapidly. Deer fawn die of many things, regardless of deer mortality is very high after birth, and it really tapers off very quickly several weeks down. So whether it's from mortality, abandonment, disease, accidents, fawns die at that young stage. So it's seen as compensatory mortality, where bears are kind of taking the weak, they're removing animals, but it's kind of built into the deer population, if you will, and their populations really thrive with this level of predation.
Certainly, yeah, and we certainly see that with the deer population these days.
Yep.
How long do bears live on average?
Yeah, on average, it's probably, I mean, so for example, in our hunting season, vehicle collisions, the vast majority are younger bears. But you also are, dispersing several thousand young bears every single year. And so that's a normal thing. But as I mentioned, we've had collared bears that have lived into their mid-teens. We take a tooth from bears, and we can basically, like the rings of a tree, we can look at the layers of enamel and estimate the age of the bear. And just this last year in our hunting season, there was a 30-year-old bear. So there are some really old bears, but kind of a mid-teens age is probably your average for a mature bear.
Great. I had no idea they could reach 30. I'm going to combine two here. So we have one during your research, what discovery or realization has most surprised you? And then another one, specifically, what surprised you about the GPS data that you've collected?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to say the GPS. Well, I'll say a couple things. I had, when I first started working with the state, I was doing my graduate research on moose at UMass. And through that, I'd worked with a bunch of the state biologists, including the main biologist in our Connecticut River office, who was kind of championing the bear research at the time. And opportunistically, I got to go out on a bear den with him once. And then once we finished collaring the moose, we had these collars, and we basically converted them into bear collars because the state was already going in the winter, and we could kind of just tag along, swap out a conventional radio collar for these GPS collars, and start building that data set because it takes time to do that. So I'd only worked with females. And then when I was doing a postdoc, I did some trapping, and I trapped my first male, a nice 450-pound male, and just it was eye-opening to me of like what a different animal it was in terms of just the power. Its forearm as big as your thigh, just a truly impressive animal that just was kind of eye-opening there. We did put a couple of GPS collars on males at that time, trapping them in kind of the west side of the Quabbin. And one of them went and did an entire run down the Prescott Peninsula and back of the Quabbin, then went over to the Connecticut River, swam the river, went through Northampton, and came back, eventually moving down to South Hadley where he'd settled for his overall territory. Another swam back and forth across the Quabbin to the Prescott Peninsula from the visitor center, which is about a mile swim, 7 times during the mating season. So those males are driven to move at that time of year and, again, find as many females as they can. I think with the GPS data, it's just simply how much they're fully integrated into our communities. Little teeny wetlands, strips of forest between homes and neighborhoods, they'll spend an enormous time. And yes, they move into the backyards to find food and things, but they're fully integrated into all these places. Another thing we saw was that this was back in 2016 or 2017. We were having a bad drought. There was spongy moth, what we're calling it now, the gypsy moth outbreak in the Quabbin area. And it decimated all the oak. There were essentially no acorns in the fall. And all the females with cubs just scattered. We had bears from that area going up to Brattleboro, Vermont, Keene, New Hampshire. One went down to West Hartford, Connecticut, just moving huge distances to find food because there wasn't anything in their home range, feeding for the fall, feeding their cubs, and coming back to their home range to den for the winter. With conventional radio collars, you would have just been like, oh, couldn't find the bear for a while. But because you eventually get this GPS data, you find out this unusual behavior that you never would have known happened before.
Totally. We just got a comment here that kind of builds on what you're mentioning, how the bears are using just little, bits of habitat in all these places. From Sally Nazer, our director of the conservation program here at the Trustees. She remembers when the state police and MassWildlife closed Route 2 to relocate a bear that was denning in the median. So it just goes to show you
So,
this
so
little
that
area.
picture, that I showed you, the police officer, that was that bear. So that was when we originally captured that bear. That was in Templeton, Mass. I happen to live just south of there. One of the environmental police officers called me on a Sunday, and he's like, "We've got this sow with cubs in the tree. You want to run up?" So we ran up. We mobilized her, put a collar on there, and she denned 2 years in a row in the middle median of Route 2. I mean, you're talking 20 feet from 2 lanes of traffic screaming by at 70 miles an hour. And we didn't handle her the 1 year where she had 1-year-old cubs because there's just a lot that can go wrong on those dens because there's 3 bears that are in there that can start running around. But when she had newborn cubs the following winter, yeah, we shut down Route 2 and immobilized her and moved her out of that location just so she didn't have to immediately try to cross the road with those newborn cubs.
Wow, yeah, quite the project.
That was a nervous
Uh,
day for me as I was going into
yeah,
to immobilize her.
for sure, I can imagine. So we've got another one here, which is when should a bear sighting be reported?
In reality, we don't need the sightings, right? We know there's bears. You saw from the GPS data, like how many bears there are in these towns, right? So I know there's bears there, and I know there's bears in your backyard. I know there's bears in your neighborhood. When we want to hear from you is when you need help, right? You're trying to figure out the why, and we went through the whys here. They're there for the food sources, is addressing those. Bear breaks into my chicken coop. What can I do? How do I address that? We're here to try to help you to work through that so that we can prevent that conflict from happening so that bear can continue to do its thing, but you're not experiencing conflict. So that's certainly when we want to know about it. Certainly any time that a bear tries to enter a home. Unfortunately, we've had probably a dozen cases this year. It's been a very bad year, mostly in the southern Berkshires, and that tends to be where it happens, where we've had bears breaking into the living spaces of home. Often it's going through a screen porch or something, and they end up inside a house. those are the things we certainly want to hear about, because those are now you're starting to get the point where that animal, if it learns that behavior, can be a public safety threat. And that's something we're going to want to really keep an eye on.
Definitely. And yeah, thanks for sharing some of those root causes for the human wildlife conflict. We can, start to recognize that more. And going back to a little bit of the GPS data you had shared, will female bear ranges ever overlap?
Yes, very much so. So, I mean, you saw that one first figure I showed you. A lot of those do. And so, once a week, I get downloads from the collars, and we'll actually see. I mean, I was just sending data to one of our regional biologists where three of our collared females were within 50 feet of each other for a couple days. Like that, they were there at the same time, moving around, and one was that female that I referenced before that we've had collared since 2015 or 2011. One's another one that we've had collared for quite some time. They were just trapped independently, but we were kind of assuming that one may be the offspring of the other. So males disperse huge distances from their mothers. The female yearlings often will just establish a range that overlaps with mom, and not disperse very far. So over time, you can get these related females and generations of females that do stack up on top of each other.
Yeah, great. And so two questions here that are a little bit similar about the tracking equipment. So first, what's the difference between a radio collar and a GPS collar? And then um, if somebody sees a bear with an ear tag on their trail cam, should they send that information in?
Yep. So all of the collars have the conventional radio collar abilities. And so these are going back to the 1960s and 1970s. Researchers in Yellowstone studying grizzly bears developed this technology using these pulsing radios. So basically, the collar will have a radio that puts out a signal at a specific frequency. We have a receiver that we can tune to that frequency for that bear. And then we can, with an antenna, go out and locate that animal. And you can use a directional antenna to say, okay, the strongest signal is coming from that direction, and narrow it down to actually locate where the bear is. But that used to be how you would have to do any habitat use studies, is kind of narrow down where that signal was coming from and make an estimate of where the bear's location was. So all the collars have that capability. It allows us to track those bears. Again, the signal from the collar changes if the bear were to die, so we can try to determine what was causing that. The GPS collars just have the added capability is that they also have that GPS unit in them that allows you to get essentially it's the same GPS on your phone or anything else, really, really precise location data on those. Oh, and the ear tags.
Typical.
No, we can't really tell with our ear tags. The ear tags we use are very, very small. If people see a larger ear tag, a large yellow ear tag, that's an animal that we have moved out of, for example, out of Worcester or something like that. It's not because, and this is kind of misinformation that's out in the public. It's not because that was a nuisance bear or something like that. It's just it ended up in downtown. Where it's just blocks and blocks and blocks of pavement, and there's no escape route where it's not going to be involved in a vehicle collision. We just take it out of town, drop it right on the edge of town, let it do its thing. They have larger yellow ear tags. The one we use for research are really quite small. You can't see the numbers, and so just a tagged animal doesn't necessarily do us that much good. Connecticut uses those very large tags on their research bears, and some of their bears do end up in Massachusetts.
Sure, great. Okay. So it looks like that might be most of the questions. If anyone has another question that they're thinking of, feel free to drop it in to that Q&A section. I'll give maybe one more minute here. Um, you had something you said sparked a question that I had about the collar, so I just forgot. Um, I'll see if I can think of it as well. Maybe not. Okay, well, it looks like that's about it. Dave, thank you so much for sharing what you've been working on, and it's hugely educational for me, and I'm sure for all the folks here tonight as well. So we'll make sure to share some of those resources you talked about, and we'll keep an eye out for bears.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me tonight.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.